My name is Tom Grayson, and I've been a paramedic in New York City for 10 years. A decade of sirens, flashing lights, and late nights spent trying to hold people together while their worlds fell apart. Most days, the job is a blur, chasing after time, patching up wounds, pushing meds, and hoping we can make it to the hospital before it's too late. We see people on the worst days of their lives, and sometimes we can save them. Sometimes we can't. The 23rd Street Pileup was one of those calls I wish I could forget, but I can't. It's the one that still wakes me up in the middle of the night, the one that makes me stare at my hands and wonder if I did enough. I tell this story because it's the only way I know how to carry it. It was supposed to be a quiet night. Mike and I were parked outside a small deli in Midtown, sipping coffee that tasted like burnt cardboard and watching the endless stream of yellow cabs weave through the traffic. The city never slept, but sometimes it felt like it was holding its breath, waiting for something to go wrong. I felt it in my gut, that unease, that gnawing feeling that something bad was coming. "Hey, you ever just get a feeling?" I asked, my eyes on the traffic, but my mind somewhere else. Mike glanced at me over his sandwich, raising an eyebrow. "Every damn night," I smirked, shaking my head. "No, I mean, worse than usual." Before he could respond, the radio crackled. "Unit 5-1, respond to a motor vehicle collision, 23rd Street. Multiple casualties, potential entrapment." The knot in my stomach tightened. We tossed our coffee, flipped the sirens, and took off, weaving through traffic like our lives depended on it, because someone's did. When we pulled up, I knew right away this wasn't just another accident. 3 cars, twisted metal, headlights flickering weakly in the dark like dying stars. The street was slick with something: oil, blood, rain. The smell of burning rubber and gasoline clawed at the back of my throat. People were shouting, their voices tangled in a chaotic mess of fear and panic. I took a deep breath, forcing my mind to quiet, focus, assess, move. The first car, a woman, mid-30s, breathing but unconscious. Mike leaned in to check her vitals while I moved to the second car. A man, mid-50s, pinned by the dashboard, conscious but fading. "Stay with me," I said, my voice calm, even though I could see the panic in his eyes. And then I heard it. A child's cry. I turned and my eyes locked onto the third car. Inside, a little boy, no older than 7, was trapped. His face was pale, pressed against the shattered window, eyes wide with terror. His tiny hands trembled as he reached out toward me, but he couldn't move. "Help him!" A woman sobbed nearby, clutching at her chest. "That's my son! Please, you have to help him!" I swallowed hard and nodded. "We're gonna get him out, ma'am. Just stay back. Let us work." I crouched by the wreckage, forcing a calm smile onto my face, even though my hands were shaking. "Hey, buddy, my name's Tom. Can you tell me your name?" The boy blinked slowly, his lips barely moving. Daniel, we're gonna get you out, okay? You just gotta hold on for me." He nodded weakly, but I could see it, the way his chest rose too fast, the bluish tint creeping onto his lips. Time was running out. "Mike!" I called over my shoulder. "We need to move fast. Kids in respiratory distress." The firefighters were already working to pry the door open, but I could hear their frustrated grunts. The metal was too twisted, too tight. I reached in through the shattered window, careful of the glass slicing into my gloves. I felt his pulse, thready and weak. "You're doing great, Daniel," I whispered. "Just hang in there, buddy." But deep down, I wasn't sure if he could. I could feel Daniel's pulse flutter beneath my fingers, faint and too fast, like a tiny bird trapped in his chest. Every second felt like a countdown, each shallow breath a reminder that I was running out of time. The firefighters kept working, the metal groaning under the pressure of the hydraulic tools, but the wreckage wasn't giving up without a fight. I glanced at the engine. It was still smoking, hissing, and somewhere in the back of my mind, I knew it could go up any second. But none of that mattered. All that mattered was the little boy staring up at me, his lips trembling as he whispered, It hurts." I swallowed the lump rising in my throat. "I know, buddy, I know. But I need you to stay awake for me, okay? Can you do that?" He nodded weakly, but his eyelids were already drooping. "No, no, 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 not now." I reached further inside the shattered window, cradling the side of his face gently, forcing his gaze back to me. Hey Daniel, what's your favorite cartoon? His little brow furrowed, his breath shallow. SpongeBob, he rasped. I forced a smile, my heart pounding. Yeah? SpongeBob, huh? I bet he'd be proud of you right now. You're doing amazing. Chris's voice cut through the chaos behind me. Tom, we gotta get him out now. We're losing him. I didn't look back, I couldn't. I tightened my grip on Daniel's hand and whispered, Almost there, buddy, just hang on. With a final metallic screech, the firefighters pried the door open, and I wasted no time. I slipped inside the car, careful of the shattered glass beneath my knees, and eased Daniel out, feeling the tension in his fragile body. He was too light, too still. As soon as I had him in my arms, I ran, straight to the ambulance, my boots pounding against the pavement, the weight of him pressing against my chest like an anchor. Let's go! Let's go! I shouted as I climbed inside, laying him down on the stretcher. Mike slammed the doors shut behind us, and the siren screamed to life. I pressed the oxygen mask over Daniel's small face, watching his chest rise and fall too weakly beneath it. Come on, kid, I whispered. Stay with me. Mike was shouting vitals to dispatch, but I could barely hear him over the rush of blood in my ears. His heart rate was dropping. His pulse was slowing. Bag him, I ordered, grabbing the ambu bag and squeezing gently, forcing air into his tiny lungs. His ribs barely moved. My hands trembled, but I kept going. Come on, kid, I whispered again, my voice cracking. Just a little longer. I glanced at the monitor. His heart was skipping beats, slipping away, and panic gripped me hard. I leaned in closer, my hand pressing against his small chest, feeling every fragile beat beneath my palm. Daniel, if you can hear me, I need you to keep fighting, okay? You're not done yet. Your mom's waiting for you, and she needs you to be strong. You can do this. I wasn't sure if I was talking to him or to myself. The ambulance rocked as we sped toward the hospital, and I kept working, each second feeling like a lifetime. Mike squeezed my shoulder, his voice softer than usual. We're almost there, Tom. But almost wasn't good enough. The line on the monitor blipped once, then again, slower this time, and then it flatlined. No, 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 I muttered, reaching for the defibrillator. My hands moved on autopilot, years of training kicking in, but my chest felt like it was caving in. I pressed the paddles to his chest, my voice barely holding steady. Charging! Clear! His little body jerked, but nothing changed. I tried again. Come on, Daniel, breathe, damn it! Silence. I stared at the monitor, praying for something, anything. My breath caught in my throat, and for the first time in a long time, I felt helpless. Mike was watching me, his eyes filled with something that looked a lot like grief. Tom, I shook my head. No, not yet. I pressed down harder on Daniel's chest, counting under my breath. 1, 2, 3, nothing. I sat back slowly, my hands still resting on his chest, and for a moment, the world stopped. The monitor was silent. Daniel was gone. I swallowed hard, my chest tightening in a way I couldn't explain. My hands stained with his blood, clenched into fists, trembling in my lap. I couldn't look at Mike. I couldn't look at the boy lying lifeless in front of me. The hospital came into view, the bright red emergency sign glowing through the windshield like a beacon of false hope. We pulled in fast, but I already knew it was too late. The hospital doors slid open with a quiet hiss, and I stepped back as the ER team swarmed the stretcher, their voices clipped and efficient, but I already knew. They didn't rush. They didn't scramble the way they usually did when there was a chance. I stood frozen, watching them work, hearing the familiar orders barked out. Bag him! Push another round! Let's get a line in! But I could see it in their faces, that tired resignation. The silent understanding between them that this was just for show now. Mike was at my side, his hand resting lightly on my shoulder. Come on, man, he said softly. Let's step back. I couldn't move. My feet felt rooted to the tiled floor, my hands numb at my sides. I was still staring at Daniel, watching the rise and fall that never came. I don't know how long I stood there, but eventually I found myself outside, leaning against the rig, the cold air hitting me like a slap in the face. I sucked in deep breaths, trying to push down the tightness in my chest. The hospital doors swung open again, and I looked up just in time to see his mother. She was sobbing, clutching at a nurse, her legs barely holding her up. Her cries were raw, echoing through the otherwise quiet night. I felt like I was drowning. I wanted to go to her, to tell her we did everything we could, that we fought for him until the very last second. But what good would that do? No words would bring her son back. No apology could fix the hole we had just left in her world. Mike stood beside me in silence, both of us watching as the weight of her grief shattered her, right there in the parking lot. He sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "You can't save them all, Tom." I knew he was right, but that didn't make it any easier. It never did. The ride back to the station was quiet. No radio chatter, no stupid jokes from Mike to break the tension. Just silence. I stared out the window, watching the city roll by, headlights and streetlights blending into streaks of color. The world kept moving, even though mine felt like it had stopped. When we pulled into the garage, I sat there for a moment, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. "You coming in?" Mike asked gently. I shook my head. "In a minute." He didn't push. He just gave me a nod and headed inside, leaving me alone with my thoughts. I glanced down at my hands, still stained faintly red. Even after scrubbing them at the hospital, I could still feel the weight of Daniel's tiny body in my arms. I flexed my fingers, but the phantom sensation wouldn't leave. With a heavy sigh, I climbed out of the rig and walked inside. The station felt different, quieter, heavier, like the weight of what happened followed us through the doors. I walked straight to the locker room, avoiding eye contact with anyone. The hum of fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, filling the silence as I leaned against my locker, staring at the nameplate that suddenly felt meaningless. My fingers trembled as I unzipped my jacket, the smell of smoke and antiseptic still clinging to the fabric. I peeled it off, letting it drop onto the bench, and pressed my forehead against the cool metal of the locker door. The words echoed in my head. "You can't save them all." But I was supposed to, wasn't I? I couldn't sleep. I just sat in the break room, staring at the coffee cup in front of me, my thoughts a storm I couldn't quiet. I thought about Daniel's mother, the way she collapsed when they told her. I thought about the way his little hand felt in mine, how he'd whispered, "Is my mom okay?" before his body went limp. But I didn't have an answer for him then, and I didn't have one now. Mike walked in eventually, sitting down across from me with his own cup of coffee. He didn't say anything, just stirred his drink and watched me. After a long silence, he finally spoke. "You want to talk about it?" I shook my head. "No." He nodded like he expected that. "You know, I've been doing this longer than you, and I still haven't figured out how to leave it at the scene." I met his eyes. "Then how do you do it?" He sighed, leaning back in his chair. "You remember the ones you save? That's all you can do." I looked down at my hands again, flexing my fingers. "And the ones we don't?" His jaw tightened, and for a second, I saw the ghosts he carried in his eyes. "You find a way to live with them." The next morning came too soon, and the weight of the night before still sat heavy on my chest. I barely slept, the few minutes I managed filled with flashes of Daniel's face, his frightened eyes, his weak grip on my hand, the sound of his mother's screams echoing in my head. I sat on the edge of my bunk, staring at the floor, feeling like I was trapped in some kind of limbo. Every part of me ached, not from the physical exhaustion, but from something deeper, the kind of tired that sleep couldn't fix. Mike walked past, pausing at the doorway. "You should head home, Tom. Take a day." I shook my head. "Nah, I'm good." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Man, you're not fooling anyone." I forced a weak smile. "Yeah? Well, I'm still here, aren't I?" He didn't argue, just gave me a nod and walked off. But his words stuck with me. The calls didn't stop. They never do. By noon, we were out on another run, an elderly man with chest pain in a cramped apartment in Queens. His wife hovered by the doorway, wringing her hands as we worked. He squeezed my wrist with surprising strength, his eyes searching mine. "I don't want to die today, son." And just like that, I was back in the ambulance with Daniel, his voice trembling, asking about his mom. I swallowed hard and forced a steady tone. "You're not going anywhere today, sir. We've got you." We got him to the hospital in time, and as I wheeled him in, his wife grabbed my arm, tears in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. "You saved him." I stood there for a second, staring at her, feeling the lump in my throat grow. "Yeah, I said softly. You're welcome. It wasn't enough to erase last night, but it was something. A few days later, I got a call from the hospital. It was the charge nurse from the ER. Hey, Tom, she said gently. Just wanted you to know, Daniel's mom asked about you. I froze. What? She was hoping to talk to you. She said she wanted to thank you for staying with him until the end. Said it meant everything to her. I swallowed the tightness in my throat, gripping the phone so hard my knuckles turned white. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything, she replied softly. Just know that it mattered. I sat in the ambulance for a long time after that, staring at the dashboard. In this job, you don't get closure. You don't get to see what happens after you leave someone at the hospital. You just move on to the next call, carrying the weight of the ones who didn't make it. But sometimes, just sometimes, you get a reminder that what you do matters, even when it doesn't feel like it. I visited Daniel's memorial a week later. It was small, tucked into the corner of a local park. A little framed photo, a few candles, and a stuffed dinosaur that looked well loved. I stood there for a while, not sure what I was doing, or why I even came. But as I knelt down and touched the edge of his photo, I whispered, I'm sorry, kid. It wasn't enough, but it was all I had. And for the first time in days, I let myself cry. The job doesn't get easier. The ghosts don't disappear. But every time I hear a mother say, thank you, or a patient smiles at me through their pain, I remember why I'm still here. Because sometimes we win, and when we don't, we keep showing up anyway, because someone has to. And maybe, just maybe, that's enough. Thank you so much for listening to my story. If you like stories like this, please subscribe to the channel and comment down below what other stories you would like to hear.